morning and welcome to episode 184 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I have my regular co-host Ian Cummer streaming live from a suburb in Moscow, and our special guest today is Max Parry, journalist and asset protection specialist working in Baltimore. So I believe it is noon East Coast time in Baltimore. I have 9 a.m. and it's probably 8 p.m. in Russia, but it might be 8 p.m. Perfect. Nailed it. Okay. We have a great program prepared. It is called 9/11 and the Manufacturing of a Global Threat. And that kind of hints at, our perception of 9/11 and, what and why it was. But Max Parry just published a great lengthy article on 9/11 at Covert Action Mag. That's a great magazine, and they also have a Facebook page, which I have linked to. They do great work there, and Max is a regular contributor to that magazine. But I would like to kick it to Max and have him provide a short summary of the article and the main points. I think there's some relatively new information regarding 9/11 that he speaks to in the article, but I know most of you guys have not read it, and so there is a link to the article in the description of this video. But Max, could you just try and get everybody up to speed on the basics?
Sure, yeah. So the article I wrote in response to some of the recent developments that have happened with the court case related to the 9/11 victims' families, who it's been a long-running perennial lawsuit. It was actually filed, I believe, back in 2003. So we're talking over 20 years that it's been, being strung along. But basically,
nothing to hide, Max. We have nothing to hide. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the 9/11 victims' families brought a lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And finally, after a couple decades, a judge in the Southern District of New York, a federal judge, ruled that the lawsuit can proceed to trial because the lawyers representing Saudi Arabia basically could not account for why several Saudi officials who were in the United States in the lead up to the attacks seemingly were providing assistance to at least two of the alleged 9/11 hijackers, specifically when they were the first two that entered the United States and were living in California. Their names were Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. And so basically, the lawsuit is now allowed to proceed to trial. And so it sort of regenerated public interest in the case. I mean, Tucker Carlson actually put out I believe it was like a 4 or 5 part series online where he covered some of this. That series I found to be very flawed, but it did have some good information in it. Actually, one of the main subjects of my article, he interviews in that series, and this guy Michael Scheuer, who he interviews in that series, was actually one of the main people I believe that was involved in the cover-up. So I think that there's some limited hangout sort of handling going on here. But so nevertheless, I wrote this article sort of trying to put the development with the court case, the fact that it's finally proceeding to trial. I tried to sort of connect it to some other developments that have happened in a couple years prior, where those two same purported hijackers who were on American Airlines Flight 77 that we're told went into the Pentagon, they had actually basically, what I argue in the article is that everything that the Saudi Arabians are said to have done was actually being done at the behest of the CIA or at the CIA's direction, because the National Security Act and the CIA's own charter forbid the CIA from operating on U.S. soil, ostensibly anyway. And so they were in a liaison relationship with the Saudi intelligence service, who were handling these two hijackers, because basically the CIA at the time, this is according to people like Richard Clarke, who was the counterterrorism czar in both the Clinton and Bush White Houses. The CIA was under pressure at the time to, what he said, he put it as develop sources or get informants inside Al-Qaeda. And so they were, there was a bombshell court filing. The Gray Zone did a big story on it a couple of years ago, that these two hijackers, the CIA had tried to recruit them as informants through their Saudi handlers, who were these people that this lawsuit is alleging were helping them, receiving them when they arrived in the United States, helping them set up living arrangements in Southern California, actually in my hometown of San Diego. It's actually a really small world coincidence, but like at the time, supposedly they were living in the Claremont Mesa section of San Diego. And as a teenager, I had a friend that lived in that neighborhood in an apartment complex that was not far from where they were supposedly living. So anyway, it's a small world coincidence. But so basically everything that the Saudis did was because they were in a joint black operation with the CIA trying to recruit these guys as informants. And so in my article, I basically argued, it's great that Saudi Arabia is now being, being finally held to task for this, but the family should really be adding the CIA and possibly the U.S. government to this lawsuit, because at the very least, they facilitated what was going on. And I go into great detail about how they were protecting them even from other law enforcement agencies. Specifically, it's said that there was basically after 9/11, there were these investigations into the, so-called intelligence failure. Why did the FBI, the CIA, say failed to stop them? And basically the mainstream narrative has been that it's just incompetence. They were Keystone cops. They failed to coordinate because there was institutional rivalry and also personal rivalry between, which I talk about in my article, Michael Scheuer, who was the head of the CIA's Bin Laden unit that was tasked with tracking him, and also the head of the FBI's equivalent squad, which was called I-49 in New York. That was headed by a guy named John O'Neill. And so there was a personal rivalry between those two because they had a disagreement on how to prosecute Al-Qaeda. Scheuer just wanted to basically expand the extraordinary rendition program or assassinate them. And O'Neill and the FBI, they wanted to arrest them and prosecute them, and so they weren't martyrs. So that there is elements of that are true. There is an institutional rivalry and there was personal rivalry, but that's not the entire reason that why these hijackers were, freely roaming around the United States, having their names in the phone book, using credit cards, going to and from the Middle East freely. The reasons that they were not detected is because the CIA and also possibly the NSA were protecting them because they were trying to recruit at least two of them as informants. Now, what they knew, the full extent of what they knew, what they were going to do is debatable. But at the very least, the CIA shares as much responsibility, if not more, than the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So I go into all the details, but that's basically the gist of my article, is that, this lawsuit could potentially bring out, it should be trying to bring out more than just what Saudi Arabia's culpability is, but also the fact that the whole thing was facilitated by the CIA. And, it's incredible, too. I get into the story of John O'Neill because they've made a couple different television series about him. But basically, he was, prior to 9/11, in the last year that he was trying to apprehend bin Laden, he was forced out. And, because he was basically pointing the finger at Saudi Arabia that they were financing bin Laden. And he was basically railroaded by the FBI management and forced out. And then in the most chilling coincidence, he gets a job at the World Trade Center as the head of security and dies in the attack. I mean, it's like you couldn't make this stuff up. So, my article tries to just try and put the different pieces together. What I believe happened, which is that O'Neill's squad was very close to nabbing these sleeper cells that were, or at least learning of the presence of all these sleeper cells in the United States, but he was consistently blocked by not just the CIA, but also other officials. I mean, in the year prior to the 9/11 attacks, there was the USS Cole bombing in Yemen, which was a Navy destroyer that was refueling in the port of Aden Harbor in Yemen. And one of the people that was involved in that attack had been in regular contact with one of those two 9/11 hijackers that was going to and from the Middle East that was living in the United States. And, the CIA had photographs of them together, wouldn't show, the FBI investigators, the pictures of them together, wouldn't share any information, that would have basically blown their cover. I mean, it was so obvious that these guys were assets being protected every step of the way. And then on top of that, the U.S. ambassador to Yemen revoked O'Neill's clearance to enter Yemen. He's the FBI's leading expert on Al-Qaeda, and a U.S. diplomat revokes his ability to enter the country.
It was hand delivered, Max. It was hand delivered.
I mean, it's just unbelievable when you actually look at the timeline. That
let me go back to something you said not too long ago. You kind of did give plausible deniability, right? So we don't have certainty. So we know they were being protected, but we don't know why they were being protected. So there's the argument that they were being protected because we were trying to recruit them and have them as informants on the inside. And so we wanted to protect them for that reason. But then, I mean, the other obvious conclusion is we were trying to protect them because we knew what they were up to and we wanted it to happen. So, I mean,
Richard Clark, there are interviews with him. He did an interview with these two filmmakers who did the 9/11 Truth documentary, 9/11 Press for Truth. He was interviewed by those two filmmakers, and he said that it went all the way to the top, because he was not aware, and this is the counterterrorism czar. He's not aware that these guys are in the country and that he insisted that it must have come from an order from the top, from the CIA director at the time, George Tenet, because the CIA's bin Laden unit, it was called Alex Station, after Michael Scheuer, who was the head of it. He had an adopted son named Alex, so that's the name he gave to it. That unit also had within it like an FBI detail there, so they could coordinate with I-49, which was the FBI squad, so they could relay information to each other. And the FBI detail at Alex Station, they learned that these two guys were in the United States. And when they tried to contact O'Neill and I-49, they were told by Scheuer had already left, but his underlings, basically a woman who later became his wife, who was.
Is her name really Alfreda?
I don't know. She later became the basis for the Jessica Chastain character in Zero Dark 30. But nevertheless, she was one of the people who basically told this FBI detail at Alex Station, you are not to let the FBI know about these two guys. So these two guys, she's obviously acting under orders. She's not making that decision herself. It's coming from, that's what Richard Clark has alleged. But you also have to wonder, well, who is George Tenet acting under orders from? I mean, this conspiracy, people act like there has to have been, hundreds of thousands of people involved to be doing this. It's like, no, it had to be coming from a very select few at the top who were giving orders, and then it's filtering on down. And I think that that it must have been coming from Cheney or Rumsfeld or these people at the very, very top telling, and we know, there was the August memo that was very specific, that was given to Bush, talking about the use of planes as missiles in a terrorist attack. I mean, when you look at the time, I mean, there's so many. Saudi Arabia wasn't even the only people that were. I mean, the Saudi government wasn't even the only government that was helping the hijackers. I mean, the Pakistani head of intelligence was wiring money to Mohammed Atta, which I mentioned in the article. Pakistan has not been sued by the 9/11 families, by the way. So, I mean, there's there's so much involved in the cover-up that it's like, where do you even start? But I think when you get down to the specific details, it's very clear what was going on here.
Now there was that lawsuit, Flight 93, I think it was, that did sue the federal government, and they settled out of court, which saved the government from having to provide information that they would have been ordered to provide in court for the case. That's considered a very significant. I unfortunately don't remember what year this happened, but it was.
I want to say that judge was the same judge that's now presiding over the Maduro case.
Yes.
Oh, really? Is. Wow.
Same judge.
Yeah. So, he's going to do the right thing. They trust him to do the right thing, But Max, I did ask you about, so maybe I was reading your article wrong, and this is so not an important point, but I'm fixated on it. So Michael Scheuer's current wife, I thought your article said Michael Scheuer's current wife, her name is Alfreda.
Yeah, well, she was at the time she was Alfreda Bukowski, but yes, she has since married him. Okay. She was basically like his disciple. He left because after the U.S. embassies were bombed in Africa, East Africa in 1998, the United States launched what was called Operation Infinite Reach, where they targeted bin Laden's training camp in Afghanistan, which the CIA had built back in the 1980s, yes. And then they also targeted a pharmaceutical factory in the Sudan. And basically Alex Station and Michael Scheuer had helped develop the intelligence that claimed that not only was bin Laden going to be present at his training camp in Afghanistan, but also that this drug complex was like manufacturing chemical weapons and WMDs and so basically the Clinton administration, which obviously also had the Lewinsky scandal going on at the time, bombed the factory. Turned out it had nothing to do with bin Laden. It produced most of the Sudan's like life-saving medicine, so it caused a huge chaos there and health crisis. And so it was a total embarrassment and disaster. And then Scheuer was kind of like retired early, let's put it that way. But Bukowski was one of the people. Well, first this guy named Richard Blee succeeded him, but then later on, Alfreda Bukowski, later Alfreda Scheuer, she succeeded him as head of the bin Laden unit. And, and then she was immortalized on the silver screen in this pro-torture movie that actually, there's a book by journalists Tom Secker and Matthew Alford called National Security Cinema that talks about the close relationship between the CIA and the military and Hollywood film productions. And that film in particular has like a whole chapter devoted to it, how it involved unprecedented collaboration between the CIA and Hollywood film. And, that movie was, even though it got an Oscar nod, it was widely criticized for, this misleading propaganda that torture leads to reliable.
Torture is good, yeah.
Not that it's good, but it leads to reliable intel, which is of course not true. I mean, a famous example I think is what's his name? One of the guys that's detained at Gitmo, Abu Zubaydah. He under duress and torture, he confessed to killing Daniel Pearl, the Wall Street Journal reporter. And then when they knew full well that it was committed by somebody else, but of course he confessed to it because he wanted them to stop torturing him. And most of these cases, like the supposed 9/11 mastermind, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, he was waterboarded almost 200 times. So, of course, he confessed to having orchestrated the whole thing. But now that whole case is tainted. I mean, he's been sitting there for 20 plus years at Gitmo. But now, I mean, who knows if they're ever actually going to be able to really prosecute him, because the whole investigation has been tainted by this unreliable torture. And who knows, he may end up walking and receiving, reparations, some kind of payment for being imprisoned for 20 plus years. I mean, we have no idea what's true and what's not now, because that whole investigation, and clearly I think it was more about turning him into a zombie, because clearly the CIA and had assets within Al Qaeda, even all the way up to the leadership level. I mean, I think even people like Ayman al-Zawahiri were possible CIA assets if you look at their history. I'm actually working on a follow-up article right now that gets into that. How even prior to these two hijackers that were on Flight 77, there's a lot of evidence to suggest the CIA already had assets prior to that, and even even at the leadership level. This is according to some whistleblowers. It's not confirmed, but there's actually a very credible whistleblower named Sibel Edmonds who makes some of these claims about Zawahiri, that he was actually meeting with U.S. officials in Azerbaijan as late as the year 2000, because while, yes, on the surface, bin Laden was being at least ostensibly pursued for having bombed the coal and the U.S. embassies in East Africa, the U.S. was strategically still partnering with Al Qaeda in certain theaters of conflict, like the Balkans, Chechnya, certainly, and also Xinjiang in Central Asia. Sibel Edmonds claims that there was actually a whole sequel, basically, to Operation Gladio, which, if people are not familiar, was a stay-behind network during the Cold War that NATO established in Europe, made up of right-wing terrorist cells that were basically it was basically like a shadow army that was to be activated in the event of a hypothetical Soviet invasion. Of course, that invasion never occurred because there was never any intention of the Soviets to ever invade Europe. But what these groups did in the interim, for instance, in Italy during the years of lead, they committed numerous false flag terrorist attacks and then blamed them on left-wing groups. If people don't believe me, you could watch a very good BBC. But basically, Sibel Edmonds alleges that in the 90s.
Yeah, I'm glad when I see Ian, it's not me that's breaking up.
I'm sorry.
No, your internet was breaking up a little bit. But we got
basically, Gladio.
Check his internet browser.
I'm sorry.
I think it's the DNI is or NSA. The NSA is doing this to us. They don't want this information out.
Yeah, sorry.
The deep state's cracking down.
Basically, she says that there was a part 2 of Gladio where the right-wing terrorists were replaced with jihadists in Central Asia and the Balkans and the Caucasus, and that Zawahiri was like the main point of contact for that. So anyway, that's what I'm working on now. But and also there was also another guy in Al-Qaeda who, if you look into his history, his name is Ali Muhammad. He was a Fort Bragg Special Forces veteran, and he was bin Laden and Zawahiri's first trainer. He was an Egyptian immigrant who came to the United States and joined the U.S. Army. He had been recruited by the CIA, and while he was in the U.S. Special Forces at Fort Bragg, he went abroad to Afghanistan during the Afghan-Soviet War and was the guy who first trained bin Laden and Zawahiri and the people in the Services Bureau that later became Al-Qaeda. So in other words, and he also showed them, he was involved in training the cell that did the 93 World Trade Center bombing, also the embassies, and so basically this CIA asset and U.S. Special Forces veteran imparted his knowledge to Al-Qaeda, and then they ended up using it to do what they did. So, I think he's kind of almost like bin Laden's CIA handler if you look into it. So
and you have an interview with him that you're going to be publishing? I'm just kidding. You didn't say
no, well, that's the thing. After 9/11, he was busted for the embassies bombing. So, but basically after 9/11, he was disappeared into witness protection. And we have no idea where he is. He was a cooperating witness.
Yeah.
And he's never been heard from since. So it's very, very
how convenient.
Yeah.
So I know Ian had a bunch of questions. I could see it on his face because I had a bunch of questions. I will give Ian a chance before I steal all the air.
I came back just in time. Yeah, sorry. I have technical issues, but yes. So Max, I read your article, and I do think it's one of the most significant topics of our era, because it completely changed the world. 9/11. It was the justification that led to the invasion, the direct invasion of Afghanistan, which I'll mention was based on extremely shoddy evidence, and they didn't even give Afghanistan the opportunity to deal with the evidence that they were even involved in response to it. Then Iraq, for some reason, we had to take a detour to Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction. We had nothing to do with 9/11, and so on and so on. I do want to add that what you said about Gitmo. It's amazing that there's still, people who were arrested and detained in the early days of the War on Terror, which started in 2001, are still there.
Yeah.
In many cases, if there's somebody who's legitimately a terrorist who's responsible for the deaths of innocent people, absolutely keep him in prison forever. I don't care. But there's a lot of people where it's debatable if they had even done anything, and there's not even an attempt to say, did this person actually do anything? Is there even a reason to have him in prison? And no one really cares. No one's even really protesting. There were, I guess, some protesters, for some people unhappy about it years ago, but it's just completely off the radar screen now. it's astonishing. I do want to say
it's sort of like just become. I mean, I remember when 9/11 happened. We take it so much for granted now, but at the time, like even the creation. I mean, that's what's so funny to me about the whole abolish ICE movement is that I remember when there was a time where the very creation of not just the Homeland Security Department, but the TSA, people were saying this is unconstitutional. This is based on the Heimatschutz of Germany, the whole Homeland Security Department. And now it's just accepted as it's here to stay forever. We just need to get rid of these individual branches like Immigration and Customs Reform. Why is the conversation not getting rid of the DHS to begin with, the whole thing? Because it's totally in violation of the Constitution. It had no reason to be created. And now these things are just here forever. I mean, it's just the paradigm shift that occurred with 9/11. Now it's just a permanent part of our everyday politics now. And that event was cataclysmic and paradigm shifting. And
your allegations are so outlandish and unbelievable. It's like, what are you going to tell us? That there was no babies in incubators being ripped out by Iraqi troops, Max? So that's my first point. My second point is your last name Parry Stein? Because you're covering for Israel, Max. You're covering for Israel. You're blaming Saudi. You're a misdirectionist.
Well, I do. Of course, that's the accusation that you'll get if you even talk about the Saudi angle, even though in my article I do mention that, yes, there was clearly at least Israeli foreknowledge, possibly. Everyone knows about the dancing Israelis case, also the bizarre circumstances surrounding this operation where apparently Mossad agents were posing as art students and infiltrating U.S. government agencies, and also seemingly eavesdropping on the hijackers or sort of following them in their. I mean, these art students were very suspiciously in locations where all the different, 9/11 hijacker cells were present. So yeah, clearly and obviously everybody could see how something like 9/11 benefited Israel. And I mean, Ehud Barak and Benjamin Netanyahu, they were all practically boasting about it.
Years ago, I actually had Israeli art students knock on my door. I swear to God. And they came in and we talked, and I'm like, I brought up the Palestine issue, and they're like, no, that's Israel. It's Israel. And Jerusalem is the capital. And I was saying, well, we don't really recognize Jerusalem as the capital. But anyway, that's an aside. So yeah, I mean, most people are going to think that, it's they see the Saudi thing as a distraction for Israeli involvement, and they want to blame Israel. And so when typically that crowd kind of blames Israel, and they kind of vindicate the United States, right? Like, it wasn't the U.S. doing it, it was Israel doing it. But from your article, it seems that there would have definitely had to have been, United States government involvement. The other question is, did these towers, how did they come down? Were there explosives in them?
Well, that's a whole other
Yes.
question. I mean, I would defer. I mean, I myself, I mean, even with the big, I think Fed encouraged narrative in the 9/11 truth community, of course, is the no planes people. The only conversation I will entertain is with Flight 77, because they have only released 3 film stills of the parking lot across the street or the gas station or whatever it is. So it is and obviously the miraculous way in which that plane was supposedly flown into the Pentagon is very, Hani Hanjour was said to have been done very poorly in his flight training. So it's sort of miraculous. So I will entertain conversations about that. But yeah, there are numerous everyone's got their own angle. I mean, as far as the Israeli thing goes, I do definitely think there was foreknowledge and possible involvement. Yes. I mean, I also think there was involvement with Pakistan. But I think ultimately it comes back to the U.S. government, what they allowed to have happen on their own soil. I think it's a really reductionist argument to say that Israel was the main orchestrator of the whole thing. I mean, it's similar with the Kennedy assassination. It's like, is it possible that Israel was involved in the Kennedy assassination? Yes, but that doesn't discount the Cuban angle, the organized crime angle. It doesn't discount the CIA. I mean, this is the idea that it was just Israel at the end of the day because they also benefit from it does not. It to me is just a reductionist argument and it's really oversimplistic. But no, I don't discount that at all, and I think it is very relevant. And the way that those purported moving company Mossad guys who were cheerleading, were cheering in New Jersey across the Hudson River, like that's very suspicious. And the way that they were just deported and no investigation was done. And as far as the way that the buildings came down, yes, since the day that it happened, I've had my doubts about that. I mean, I would defer to the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. The head of that organization actually shared my article on Twitter or X. I would defer to them. I mean, there does need to be an investigation into that as well. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to. The way that those buildings came down was very, very strange. Unfortunately, that's led a lot of people to think that there were no planes. I mean, which to me is just ridiculous. And that's something that's a narrative that's pushed by people that want to discredit the 9/11 Truth movement.
Well, I'm not an engineer. I don't know anything about aviation, but
neither do I.
Well, I mean, the thing is that when it comes to details like that, do you need planes? I wouldn't even say, I wouldn't without being an expert, I wouldn't even definitively say one way or the other. I mean, because planes, of course, are obviously fast, almost faster than you can see them. It's just the main thing is that the buildings were, I think, they're brought down by explosives. It's really at this point hard to deny that there was some controlled demolition. And I feel
it certainly seems possible. I mean, especially, the dead giveaway with that is Building 7 because it only had structural fires and, there's even I remember seeing a video of Building 7 like a few hours before it came down, like a film crew went in there and there was like a U.S. Secret Service agent in a hazmat suit. And, there's like blaring alarms going off because of the fires, the office fires upstairs. And the idea that the building was about to come down just seems ridiculous. I mean, supposedly it's so hot from these fires that also that's another thing. I mean, Tucker Carlson's documentary even got into it, but there's audio.
Office furniture.
Yeah, well, there's audio of firefighters on 9/11. I guess one of the firefighting units managed to get up to the point of impact, or very close to it anyway, on whatever floor number it was. And you can hear audio of firefighters saying, this is really bad. It's a really bad fire. It's very hot up here, but I think we can get this under control. Now we're told that it's so hot that it melted the steel beams and collapsed the building.
But people
he's up there and he's saying that it's, and apparently this guy, the guy saying this on the radio, on the walkie, was one of the FDNY's like top experts and he was like a really highly regarded firefighter. So for him to say this is, the whole, there's many layers to this cover up, but I wasn't even going to get into that for my article because it's just another subject entirely.
Well, on that
and I'm not
point,
an expert on any of that, so I would defer to people who actually are. And obviously there needs to be an investigation of that too, because the public is clearly not satisfied with the explanations they were given. Whether it's about Building 7 or how the towers came down and all that.
Well, I'll add, I was at California wildfires as a part of the California National Guard. I was at California wildfires. I'm not a firefighter. I don't know anything about fires or the engineering, related to fires. But fires very fast. And if people get caught in it, you're basically, there's some exceptionally rare circumstances. We're not even talking about, in the World Trade Center, just a wildfire. If you're caught in it, you're dead. There's some exceptionally rare cases of people surviving, like in a pool. But generally, you get caught by it, you are toast. Those fire shelters they issue firefighters, like there's basically nothing that will save you. But from what you're telling me, there's this recording of them right up next to the fire that's supposedly melting the whole building and causing it to collapse, and saying, "Oh,
yeah, the point they got up to very close to the point of impact." I guess there was, because the whole thing was, they said that the explanation for why people in the lobby heard all these secondary explosions, or as they described them, secondary explosions, was because the flaming jet fuel, basically the elevator shafts had, all the elevators had come crashing down, and that the flaming jet fuel was shooting down the elevator shafts and coming all the way down to the lobby and making these explosions. Well, there was a freight elevator. They went up, this group of firefighters, they went up the stairs, and then they got to a floor where there was a freight elevator, I think at about like the middle point of the building. And they took the freight up to near the point of impact. And they got up to, or I think it was the other way around. They took the freight from the lobby up to the middle point, and then they took the stairs up, and they got near the point of impact in one of the towers. I'm not sure which one. I think it was the first one that collapsed. So the tower that was hit by United Airlines 175. So they got near there, and there's audio of it. It's very suspicious, that alone. How could they possibly have gotten up to? And there's people that survived, a few people that survived in floors above. That managed to come down. Not many. Most people that were on floors above the point of impact died, but there were a few that did manage to make it down.
So, I'm just trying to pin down what we can have certainty about, and what, we can assume is true, and then what, we're not sure of, but it doesn't matter. And so to me, I'm not sure how the buildings came down, but I don't think it really matters. What I think we can be certain of is that, like you said earlier, there are, people at the highest level of the U.S. government that clearly had foreknowledge and were interested, and have been interested ever since, in covering up and obfuscating, the reality of what happened, which of course, causes suspicion. And I think it's safe to say that, like you said, Pakistani intelligence was involved, Saudi intelligence was involved, Israeli intelligence was involved, and definitely U.S. intelligence was involved. And so this is all consistent, with our worldview, our Marxist-Leninist worldview, where we understand that the ruling establishment, the capitalist class dictatorship, has nothing to do with the liberal nonsense that liberals, are indoctrinated to perceive reality as, a government that's representative of the people, and you have national sovereignty, and they're here to defend us, and they would never allow anything like this. So, all of the facts that we can be certain of are inconsistent with a liberal worldview, but they're entirely consistent with the worldview of communists and people who see, reality in terms of a class-based dictatorship who is interested in maintaining their dictatorship and organizing things in a way that benefit their interests. So how are they going to benefit from 9/11, Max? Can you explain that one?
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because, being on the left and being part of the 9/11 truth movement myself, it has, in sort of a weird way, I think, at least not so much during the Bush years, but in the years since, it's sort of become stigmatized as like a right-wing movement somehow, or a libertarian-dominated movement, or I think it goes across the political spectrum. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who purport to be on the left or Marxists, who have this idea. I mean, Michael Parenti just died. He was very good on this in describing how there's a lot of people on the left or who ascribe to Marx or claim to anyway, that seem to have this idea that there's an inherent conflict between what Parenti called like the structural and the functional. That is, that if you recognize that capitalism as a system has a ruling class, and that we live in this system that favors one class over others, that somehow getting into things like the Kennedy assassination or 9/11 or these events where there's a cabal or a conspiracy somehow is like diametrically opposed to a overall structural critique. When to me, it's the exact opposite. Something like Marxism does, that you could call Marxism a conspiracy theory. This idea that the ruling class gets together and conspires against, in their interests, so yeah, I don't see it at odds with my own, the political. I mean, I'm very open about the biases that I have and the angle that I'm coming from. And yes, most people who are involved with 9/11 truth, unfortunately, it is, I would say, somewhat disproportionately like of a libertarian or bent.
Yeah.
But it really should be, in the early days anyway, at least during the Bush administration, it was a very much more across the political spectrum, and I would say equally, because this is in the interest of the American public as a whole. It's not a left-right issue. It's a very much applies to everybody, and everyone as an American should, as a human, should want to know what happened with this event that was used to launch these illegal wars afterwards, and impede on our civil liberties and so on and so forth. So I think that finding out the truth about 9/11 totally fits in with something like, what you and I happen to be Marxists.
Yeah.
I don't see it as, and the Kennedy assassination is very similar. I mean, people like Chomsky would, and Alex Coburn and other people who were on the left were really tried to stigmatize Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories, and to me, those people are very misguided. And, it makes perfect sense to me. Of course, the ruling class gets together and, especially, the idea that there is, we live in ostensibly a democracy. Of course, we all know it's not really a democracy. And so the idea that a shadow government or a parallel government or a state within a state would arise using intelligence agencies, because the interests of the American people do not align with those in power or those who really control everything, the ruling class. So of course they would have to develop these clandestine means to achieve their aims. So to me, it's something like, and of course the other thing about this that's there's sort of an American exceptionalist attitude to anyone that would doubt or stigmatize 9/11 conspiracy theories, because if you talk about these kinds of events happening in other countries, like non-Western countries, oh yeah, that happens.
They believe it immediately. The
government conspired, staged an event, the Reichstag fire, whatever it is. They staged an event to consolidate power and crack down on the population and take away their civil. If you say that this happens in, I don't know, some country in South America or the Middle East or Russia. Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing.
The problem with all those buildings catching on fire is they never collapse, Max.
Yeah, or they'll say, Putin staged all the biggest
bombings. Yes.
Yeah, the apartment bombings. They say that Russia staged the apartment bombings, even though that's clearly not true, or at least it's not the way that they say it was.
Well, and the thing about the difference between the Chechen terrorism and the 9/11 terrorism is that there wasn't one singular thing the Chechens did that provoked a Russian response. I mean, they did multiple things. They did school shootings. They did terror. There's multiple terrorisms. There's the invasion of Dagestan. With 9/11.
Which had happened before. That's what I thought.
Before, yeah, there was already a casus belli to respond and militarily retake.
And the Bin Laden's representative actually in the Chechen separatist movement, this guy Ibn al-Khattab, I've written about this as well. You guys had me on for that. He said, we are going to bomb Russian cities, plant bombs in Russian cities. Now, I don't know. Maybe there was some funny business with the FSB. There was an incident where they said it was to test the public's vigilance. I mean, law enforcement does do drills all the time where they, plant the dummy bomb. And, I've heard about this just doing security myself. I've heard about incidents where, they do active shooter drills now with a fake active shooter. It's crazy. I think it's kind of dangerous and kind of puts the public at risk, but they do these sort of drills to test the public's vigilance. That's what the FSB said went on, because after the apartment bombings, there was, I guess, another incident where the FSB was supposedly caught with a dummy bomb at another complex or something. So there began to be these conspiracy theories swirling that the FSB had done the apartment bombings. Maybe there was some faction within the FSB that wanted further casus belli going to Dagestan, because they had already invaded Dagestan. Actually, the local population there really fought back against
militias. Yes, I think the main thing is that so there was a lot. The Chechen, and what I find interesting is that these same guys who are extremely it's a war of Western versus Western civilization versus Islam, and we need to paint our bullets with pork grease, pork grease. Those guys. You ask those same guys who literally think Islam is the biggest threat human civilizations ever faced, will turn around and say, oh, those poor Chechens, the Russians were so mean to those poor helpless Chechens who wanted to be free and democratic. It's you're talking the craziest of the crazy.
The Taliban was the only government to recognize the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, because it was so ultra conservative and overrun with drug trafficking and the mafia, and they had a very strict interpretation of Sharia law. Only the Taliban would recognize them. And this idea that they were trying to create this democratic country, because they're going on and on about how Kadyrov is so supposedly persecuting gay people. It's there wouldn't be any gay people had the Chechen separatists taken power, because they would have all been killed. So
it's they weep about the Russians were mean to Grozny. Well, yes, the Russians were mean to Grozny, but is it worse than what was done to Fallujah or any other?
Raqqa.
Under Yeltsin in the first Chechen War, the Russian bombing of Grozny was very brutal. He was not interested in resolving that conflict. He was trying to use it for his political gain. And also there was arguably nuclear blackmail going on, which is why they didn't go in fully. There was concern that the Chechens had somehow acquired loose nukes that
I think that's BS, because we never heard of those nukes again. But
it didn't come to pass. But it's the reason why, part of the reason why anyway, that Putin just when Putin took power, they just went in there and got rid of the Ichkerian government and the Islamists and whatnot. Putin was competent. He wasn't drunk half the time, and he actually brought an end to that conflict. Unlike Yeltsin, it was just completely.
Yeltsin, because the interesting thing about the first Chechen War is that the Russians did win it, but then there was kind of like it was snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It was a very weird peace where they basically gave Chechen everything they wanted.
It was humiliating.
It was very much. And it did necessitate. I think it's pretty indisputable. It did necessitate the second Chechen War because the first peace deal didn't resolve anything. It was just so bad. Yeah.
So Daryl's just pointing out that the Washington Times article saying that Mossad has the power to do false flags, to attack American interests and then blame Arabs, and of course they do. But I just don't think they would do that without the consent at the highest levels.
Well, also, the Washington Times is owned by the Korean Unification Church. It's the Moonies newspaper, which is a right-wing cult that has all kinds of ties to intelligence agencies itself. So, I mean, that's not just automatically discounted. I'm just saying I want to see other sources.
But again,
obviously that's partly true, but
that reality though is consistent with the worldview. It's not like that fact doesn't contradict what we think about things. And so that's what I want to do. I want to kind of provide a little bit of context because I feel, Max, that I asked you a question that you did not directly respond to. So I'm talking about motive, right? So why would the United States push this? So let's look at the context, right? So it was the Cold War. We had the Cold War, 1989, 1991. The Cold War ends. But the thing is that, what are the interests of the ruling Western establishment? The ruling Western establishment still has interests. They have interests of global domination and subordinating, other societies, controlling other resources, controlling other governments. So they need a military industrial complex. They need a global military, and they don't really have a justification because they understand that people want a peace dividend. People want to invest money in high-speed rail, a healthcare system, an education system. So they don't want to relent on this constant, propaganda that the United States is under attack, and we have to invest in intelligence, in an empire, in a violent military empire. And so, how do you justify? Once the Cold War is over, once the great enemy is defeated, once it's the end of history has been achieved. What are we going to do to further our interests? Because, we've got to justify that. And so, I just see this event, the 9/11 event, as a big, justification that they could always point to say, see, we don't have peace. There's dangerous elements out there, and we have to invest in this global military empire. And
the Project for a New American Century, rebuilding America's defenses. That's why there's so many theories about that, because they describe in their, that think tank in their big manifesto, they basically
the need for a new Pearl Harbor event.
They needed a cataclysmic, paradigm-shifting event. A new Pearl Harbor is the way they chillingly put it. And that's exactly what happened. And the Bush administration was filled with people from that think tank and the neoconservative movement. So, the idea that people at the very top, these ideologues, would not, have a vested interest in at least allowing something like this to happen or facilitating it, even if they didn't know the full details of what was going to take place, or
it's a little too coincidental. It's a little too convenient, a little too coincidental. I think any objective person looking at the context through a proper lens of understanding, oppositional class interests and how, the ruling elite don't really share the interests of the American people. And that's the thing, because that's why it doesn't make any sense to a lot of people, because a lot of people are just brainwashed into liberalism and they assume that the American government is representative of the American people. And so when it does things against their interests, they don't get it. They try and figure it out, and they have all these theories to explain, oh, it must be Israel, because our government wouldn't do that. It's got to be Israel. It's got to be
that's actually a very good point. It does seem to be the case that a lot of the people that really overemphasize the Israeli role. Not that there wasn't one at all, but they overemphasize it.
Yeah.
Do seem to have a sort of do seem to come from a perspective that is sort of American exceptionalist, and they don't want to face the fact that the United States government probably played a much larger role than the Israeli, and then they assign this sort of omniscient or all-powerful Zog idea about Israel, and when it's really more of a symbiotic relationship. Yes, Israel does obviously have unprecedented sway over the United States government. No one's denying that. But the idea that they completely dictate U.S. foreign policy, including, or that they are the completely behind, if there is a state within a state, that it's not an American ruling class that's directing it, it's an Israeli cabal, I think is, just very naive. I mean, of course, the neoconservative movement is ultra-Zionist. That's also the case. But, there's also just as many Arabists, that goes back to the 50s and 60s, where there was a conflict even within the U.S. government and the CIA. There were Arabists, and then there were also people that wanted to shift to Israel. So there are political games that goes on. There's infighting. There's different factions within the elite. But
yeah,
I think ultimately assigning too much to Israel is actually, and it actually ends up benefiting the cover-up, right? Because it's able to be easily dismissed as just anti-Semitism or whatever. But there were multiple governments, including our own, involved in the cover-up, and hopefully this lawsuit can at least regenerate public interest. I mean, it really has, but not to the extent that it should. But I think that there is an element of truth when people talk about the Saudi aspect. They are sort of going to be made the fall guys. They already sort of are, with the way that someone like bin Salman has been villainized in the American media, but the way that he's treated as like an anomaly, or like they're all like him. He's just the most brazen as far as like the Saudi rulers. I mean, the Khashoggi killing. I mean, I think that the Khashoggi killing was very much related to 9/11 because Khashoggi was actually friends with bin Laden and interviewed him several times in the 90s when he was first falling out of favor with the Saudi government, when he was criticizing them for allowing U.S. troops in the Holy Land, and when they wouldn't let him, bin Laden had wanted to actually volunteer the Mujahideen to fight Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War, and the Saudis turned him down. That's when the sort of public rift between the Saudis and bin Laden started. And Khashoggi was one of the people that they dispatched to talk to him and try and talk him out of his anti-government activities. But actually, going back to the late 70s in Saudi Arabia, there was a seizure of the Grand Mosque there by Islamist groups, because despite Saudi Arabia's, ultra-conservative religious society, obviously the House of Saud family does not abide by what they impose on the population. They are the most decadent and depraved, sinful people that there is. And they had been, in the 70s trying to modernize the kingdom and sort of bring it into the secular world somewhat. And a lot of that's related to the petrodollar. And of course, there were a lot of Islamists that were very, very upset. And so they seized the Grand Mosque, and there was a big shootout. But ever since then, the Saudis have had, the House of Saud family has had a very strategic relationship with the Islamists. It's kind of like the Nazis in Ukraine and the Zelensky government. There's this threat that if and basically the Saudis, the House of Saud has to, empower the Islamists to protect themselves so they can remain in power. They have this agreement. It really goes back to the agreement between the House of Saud and the founder of Wahhabism centuries ago, and that's continued. And so that's the relationship between a group like Al Qaeda and the House of Saud, and why they covertly finance them is because they have this sort of there's a protection racket basically going on, and there's this fear that they could be overthrown at any time, and so in order to maintain their kingdom, they fund these groups, they help them, and so there's a lot of confusion about that. A lot of people don't understand the Saudi motivation for funding a group like Bin Laden, but it really goes back to that, I think. But the Khashoggi killing, his uncle, Adnan Khashoggi, was a major arms dealer, and he was involved with all kinds of deep state corruption in the United States and around the world. And so Jamal Khashoggi, I think, for years was a propagandist for the Saudi regime, with Washington Post. And he finally started to make some mild criticisms of the KSA. And, that's been the mainstream narrative, was that he was criticizing their human rights record, and that's why they killed him. When in fact, I think that might have been part of it, but I really think the reason was because he had a lot of dirt on the Saudi government related to its involvement in 9/11, but also stuff about his uncle being involved in like the BCCI scandal in the United States. He was an arms dealer and involved with like the Safari Club. I mean, Jamal Khashoggi had all kinds of dirt about the ruling elite. So I don't think the way that he was killed, it was about sending a message to people who have that kind of classified knowledge, like that this is what will happen to you, even if you are a scion, of the Saudi elite, and that's who reigns over there. And so this is who our government's in bed with. We've been trading weapons for oil since the 1930s when Roosevelt was in power. So the idea that Israel is the only government that has unprecedented sway over the U.S. is just simply not true. There's multiple governments that do. Turkey has a very powerful lobby as well. That doesn't mean that Israel doesn't surpass the Saudis or the Turks, but it's still, I think a lot of foreign governments ultimately have who we maintain this sort of Faustian bargain with, this strategic alliance, unholy alliance. I think those are maintained because these governments blackmail each other. They know they have various dirt on each other. And, that's what everybody says about Israel, as far as they at least have dirt on the Kennedy assassination or JFK or 9/11, or, it's certainly the case with the Epstein files. We know Israel's connections with that. So, we are ruled by a criminal mafia state, a hidden government. So
comprised of many factions, right?
Yes.
And there's infighting, and ultimately, they come out with a strategy. They fight over the strategy. They fight over policies. Ultimately, they decide upon who's going to be the figurehead. It's Trump now, and what policies we're going to pursue. Is it going to be, is Israel first, or is it going to be, Saudi Arabia first, or are we going to, what are we going to do with Iran? There's a lot of people.
Look at the way look at the way Trump, taking the Qatari plane. And he's playing the Arabists against the Zionists. He's maneuvering. He's actually a much savvier politician than I think people give him credit for. He sort of rules by chaos. But yeah, just look at the influence even within his one administration with the Gulf monarchies and with Kushner and the Israelis.
The point is, this reality we're describing is not compatible with liberalism, right? This isn't what liberalism teaches. And so I just liked, because most people are indoctrinated into the religion of liberalism and they don't know how to conceive of things outside of that framework. And so, what I'm always trying to do is introduce people to a whole new way of thinking, the right way of thinking, where, you got to dispense with all these silly liberal beliefs of representative democracy, individual nation states that have, sovereignty and decide their own affairs. No, it's a class-based order. It's the,
and it's not beholden to any nation. It's not beholden
right.
to any nation. I mean,
so that's one of the points that I constantly like to hit on and make clear, just because, of the mindset I'm constantly running into on social media. And so it's important to understand the nature of this Western empire, this Western ruling class establishment, and how they operate. And it's comprised of many factions with competing interests, but a lot of overlapping interests. And the overlapping interests include, maintaining themselves as the ruling class and, really have an antipathy for democracy, really hate democracy. They do not want a government that actually represents the people. And when they're threatened by that, they attack it. And that's one of the overlapping interests, is to keep democracy from happening wherever possible. And so now on the planet, we have the biggest democracy in the world is China. And so I think, we're seeing how the West is maneuvering and shaping the battlefield for a future conflict with that democracy, because that democracy just represents a threat to their mafioso dictatorship, elite oligarchy, Western imperialist system, for lack of a better term, that has been in charge since 1945. But that's a point I like to hit on repeatedly, and I probably sound like a broken record, and I can tell I've already caused Ian to have a nap, even though his eyes are open. That's okay.
No, I'm listening. It's not boring. I think, again, you have certain...
ideological.
Well, I think maybe on certain things you're overly optimistic. I'll say that. But yeah. So where else do we want to go with this?
Well, I like contextualizing it. 9/11 was a huge event that justified more imperialism, less civil liberties, less democracy, more spending for the military-industrial complex. Go ahead, Max.
I was just going to say, I think that, with all the whole discourse that's dominating politics right now is the way that the U.S. is declining, right? That the way that U.S. imperialism is not able to do the things it once was. Just look at this disaster, this ridiculous attempt at regime change in Venezuela. The United States is not the hegemon it once was. By all accounts, we're declining economically and militarily. Well, maybe not militarily, but at least as the preeminent superpower, it's fading. I think it can all really sort of be traced back to 9/11. I think the U.S. empire kind of committed suicide, starting with that event. Everything that's happened since, in terms of the U.S. overplaying their hand, going into the Middle East, trying to establish these colonies to get access to the resources. If one assumes that the U.S. really did, at least the U.S. government was at least involved in facilitating 9/11 or allowed this to happen on purpose, whatever your perspective is, I think it all can kind of be traced back to that event where this, we were it was like Fukuyama, who was on PNAC, he said, this is the end of history. We're the only superpower now. The way that the U.S. behaved, this doctrine of preemption and, going into these countries, it really sort of caused its own downfall. And I think it really can be traced back to 9/11. Whether it happened on purpose or not, like it's sort of, I think that's when the decline began. Can be traced back to that event, and I mean everything that's happened politically since then, including like the ascendancy of Trump and whatnot, can be traced back to what happened. I think that's when that was a paradigm shift, and that's when the decline sort of started, when those 4 planes were hijacked.
There weren't planes, Max. It was a hologram.
Yeah, they were holograms. Gosh. Yeah.
So no, I'm sorry. I jest. I think we did good. Okay, so I did want to plug you. You have your own podcast, Max, and a lot of people probably don't know about it because YouTube, strangles the algorithm. And so what is it called? Can you remind us?
It's called Captive Minds. It's myself and this other young journalist named Shayna Batterson, who also writes for Cam. We were both on another podcast together, and we left that podcast and started our own. And yeah, we discuss everything from espionage and the Cold War and CIA support. Our last episode was on, the kidnapping of Maduro and the CIA's history of involvement in drug trafficking from Afghanistan to the Vietnam War to Central America. The episode before that, we did an interview with a guy named Ryan Perkins, who wrote an article about the CIA, how it created the New Left, and and also the way that the political right is sort of confused about it, and with this like cultural Marxism trope that they think that like the Frankfurt School and co. are like authentic Marxists, even though like what they did had very little, if anything, to do with Marxism.
No, our government is communist. Totally, man. Our government is communist. I mean,
yes,
look at the planks of communism.
Yeah, Marcuse was a communist who infiltrated the CIA. Yeah, that's why you have wokeness. So yeah, we interviewed him. That was actually our most popular episode, I'd say. It got widely shared and got a lot of views and stuff. But yeah, we talk. If that's your cup of tea, that's what we talk about. Yeah, it's Captive Minds. We're on Substack and YouTube as well, so you can check me out there. And then, like I said, my writing is syndicated at Cam.
And you got part 2 of the current one you're working on.
Yeah,
right
I'm
now.
working on a second part, which primarily focuses on Ali Mohammed, who was the Egyptian
boxer,
U.S. Special Forces veteran who was Bin Laden's first trainer. That's what part 2 is about. So it'll be about how,
not to be confused with Muhammad Ali, the boxer. Sorry, my bad, Max.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not Muhammad Ali. Not Cassius.
What about Daryl? I agree with Daryl. Like it's like I'm not convinced that a plane went into that tower. Like at the angle and how difficult that maneuver would be.
Yeah.
And the fact that
I'll entertain that. I mean, it's when people say that there were no planes going into the towers. I'm like, okay, I can't take you seriously. But the Pentagon, it's where we don't really know. And United 93 is another one we don't really know. I mean,
yes,
that's a weird one because I mean we were told
no debris.
We were told this story about,
that's the one where
passenger revolt, and also there was only 4 hijackers, not 5. Also, the guy that was the hijacker pilot on that one, there's reason to think that he might have gotten cold feet. I mean, they took forever to finally hijack the plane. If you look at they took way too long, and by the time they had hijacked the plane, supposedly the passengers knew about the other planes, so they supposedly.
And that's the one where the cell phones magically work at high altitudes. Well,
they said that all of them had. There were phone calls placed on all of them.
Yeah.
There were phones on airlines back then, but it was you had
not cell phones.
Not cell phones. You had airlines.
Even now, my phone does not work on the plane. plus
Yeah,
years
there's
later.
a lot. There's a lot of questions.
I flew to Hawaii and they had Starlink and it was free and it was easy and my phone worked like a regular phone through the whole flight. It was amazing. And I've flown there a lot, but it happened one time and I don't know why they decided that flight they were going to let us have access to Starlink. It was so easy. You didn't have to log in. You didn't have to create an account. You just hooked up to it and then your phone worked like normal. But I'm glad we could, clarify the no planes thing because we're not talking about, the Pentagon. We're talking about World Trade Center 1 and 2 and the allegation that those were holograms. We're kind of making fun of that.
I mean, there's digitally enhanced. There's a whole channel that's WTC enhanced videos. They've gone back and digitally enhanced the footage. There's photographs where you can even see the fucking United Airlines logo. I mean, it's like the idea that they were not planes. I mean, it's just.
Yeah,
it's retarded.
But the Pentagon is different. The Pentagon could have been a missile.
Until they show the. I mean, the idea that they only had one surveillance camera on the Pentagon, I find. I mean, they have footage. They need to release it. Until then, the public. I mean, it's actually to their benefit not to release it because it gets people off on this red herring about there being no fucking planes. And then, of course, the 9/11 Truth Movement is this kooky thing. That's I think one of the reasons why it's taken 20 fucking years for the 9/11 victims' families to finally get this lawsuit is because you have people discrediting the movement with, these theories that just shut the whole conversation down, and it's not serious. So, finally the public is getting over the 20 years of stigma that's been attached to even asking questions.
I mean, we're still, JFK is still being, concealed. They're not going to be honest about that ever, maybe. And then 9/11 is so far the same. We'll see. But the way to think of that, the way to make sense of it, the way to understand it is that, there's oppositional class interests, the ownership class has interests that are diametrically opposed on many issues to the interests of the working class. And that's the explanation for why they behave how they behave. They're not interested in empowering the working class. They're not interested in allowing us to have a government that represents us. They are opposed to that, and they will kill and die in order to avoid that from happening. And of course, they're going to cover up shit. They're going to blow up their own shit. They're going to do false flags. This is just part and parcel of, oligarchy and how they operate to maintain it.
What are you talking about, Billy Bob? They only do that in South America, in the Middle East, and Africa. Our government would never do stuff like that.
You present a convincing case. And so, but no, hey, it was really good to talk to you and to talk about this issue. It's a very important issue, and to go over the article. And I recommend everybody read it for themselves at Covert Action Magazine. There is a link to it in the description.
Thank you.
Check out Captive Minds podcast. I have what's that word? I have suggested people watch it on my own Facebook. I promoted you guys on my Facebook. There was a really good, a particularly good episode that I suggested people watch on my Facebook. So, but anyway, we will reconvene on Friday. I have my special guest, Christine Lynn, is going to join me on Friday for episode 185. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Ian. And we will see everyone soon. Goodbye.